Okay. Hi, everyone. We have Lorenzo Yasko. He's our techie consultant, and Douglas Andrews' son over there is his techie consultant. So let me just start with a very quick intro, which is what Lorenzo suggested. Um, you know, Andrew recently-ish retired, I guess, in July, and I saw a video. You would be amazed at how prepared I am, Andrew. My conductors would be very happy if I prepared my parts as well as I did my spying on you. But they did a wonderful video on his very last performance where Simon Rattle pulled him out in front of the crowd and told everyone that he had a chat with Sir Colin Davis, who was Andrew's previous music director, and they had a chat on why he had accepted the position as music director. And he said, I played Mahler 4, and when I heard Andrew Marriner play the introduction to the last movement, his sound was so magical, and everyone else felt so inspired and was so magical. I thought to myself, I want to continue making music like this, and therefore I'm going to take the job. Okay, so I think that starts to sum up who we're talking about. Okay, so welcome, Andrew. It's so great to see you. You're looking healthy. I haven't seen you since July.
That's right.
We had a wonderful day. And so anyway, we're both extremely new to this, and I have all kinds of clarinet geeky questions, but I thought let's break the ice. A lot of people know Andrew as a very prominent clarinet player, a very prominent clarinet teacher, but what they don't know, or some people don't know, is that Andrew's a wonderful storyteller. And I know it's a question mark, but about 34 years, I think, as principal of clarinet with the London Symphony, he has some tremendous stories. And my personal favorite, I've known Andrew for a while, is involving Sibelius' first symphony. Everyone knows, hopefully, it starts with an enormous clarinet solo. And Leonard Bernstein, since he was in the news recently with his 100th birthday, I thought it would be a fantastic story to start with. So, Andrew, you're now on the spot. Welcome.
Well, it's very good to see you, Andy, and I'm sorry if I'm looking a little rosy from blushing from the compliments that have been flying around. Don't believe a word of them. But it's really good to speak to you. And yes, it was one of the more dramatic moments. I mean, on a personal note, of course, it involved the illness of a member of the orchestra. So that in itself was really a very distressing time. But of course, like all these things, the worst the situation is sometimes the resulting drama that comes out of it is the more acute. So we were in Japan. It was Bernstein's anti-penultimate concert, as it turned out. So he was traveling with his physician because he only had a few months to go himself. And we'd had various dramas on this tour already. We were playing in Sapporo, and of course Sibelius won. Was the piece on the program that we had prepared in some distress because a member of the orchestra had away from the tour but at home had passed on. So the rehearsal had been in a way a preparation for this concert, and in the rehearsal, Bernstein said, "Oh, Andy, keen for this member of the orchestra who had passed away, keen away." You see, so the Tim started, and I moaned on the miserable opening to Sibelius one, and it was all very potent and powerful. And come the concert on the Sunday afternoon, I kicked off in the same way, and we got to the halfway point virtually unscathed. But at that point, there was a terrible clattering from behind me, and one of the members of the orchestra, whose daughter was also playing in the same concert, so not a pleasant experience for anybody, but he keeled over and was obviously medically really, really unwell. So at that point, what do? I mean, there's just you and a Tim sort of quietly humming away in the background. So Bernstein flagged me down to stop, and there was complete silence. So the way I tell the story
In a
was me.
concert, right? This is in a concert.
Yeah, this is now in the concert.
Okay.
And in the concert, we'd got to the midway point, and this disaster had befallen one of our colleagues behind me. So the way I tell the story is it was me that shouted "Doctor" into the silent room. Of course, who goes to a concert on a Sunday afternoon in Japan? About 300 doctors. But of course, Bernstein's physician got there first, and various other Japanese doctors came to help. And the member of the orchestra was taken away, seemingly unresponsive. And so this was a really dramatic and difficult experience. And about sort of 40 minutes later, I was summoned to the maestro's room, and Bernstein said, Andy, baby, you're about the only person in the world. He and Tony Pappano get away with calling me Andy. Everybody else calls me Andrew.
Well, you don't want to downgrade to my name, huh?
You see, I wouldn't want the association. And so anyway, I went in, and Bernstein said, look, luckily the guys pulled through. That's the good news. The bad news is it's in the contract. We have to play the symphony. So go back on. So of course, Bernstein's way of wishing you good fortune was always to a Beinbruch. So he'd knee you firmly in the thigh. So he would spring onto stage athletically, and you would come along hobbling behind, wounded by his Beinbruch gesture. And of course, for good luck, he would give you a cheerful lick in the ear. So you'd sort of walk back on stage, sort of like this. And we had to go and sit down and then start the symphony again. And so we all know where it goes, to the halfway mark. And again, it was without incident, but until the halfway mark, where, of course, the ambulance that had been summoned to take away the ailing player decided that this was the perfect moment to leave for the hospital. And of course, he pulled up into the loading bay, which is just adjacent to the stage. So the first warning signal we have, of course, was while I'm holding this F dramatically, this sort of flashing light started. And of course, I should have realized that before I was able to progress, there was going to be a problem. The siren started at full blast, and about three yards from where I'm sat, taking the horn player away. And so we waited for what seemed like an hour and a half. It must have been 2 minutes. And there's a sort of deathly hush. And just as the last faded away, Lenny went, and it was, I finally got to play the second half of the solo. And it was with great relief that the tremolando came in with those violins. Never have been so happy to hear a violin tremolando. So, yeah, I mean, the trouble is, some of the worst stories, I never get nervous for concerts, particularly unless there is illness around, an illness of colleagues or illness in the audience, but that always rather freaks me. I don't know if it does you.
Well, well, let's just put this, I don't know if Bernstein's gesture was very coronavirus friendly in today's world, but it's nice to hear little flashbacks about when the world was a little bit different. So
it was certainly different.
That's great. I mean, we really have an icon here. I mean, as I posted before, Andrew's a real connection to the past masters and the presents. In fact, I want to share the very first time I heard your name, we shared the same quasi-boss. I was a first-year fellow at the New World Symphony. This was about 32 years ago. And I walked right up to Michael Tilson Thomas. I said, I heard you're the new conducted the London Symphony. Who's the principal clarinet? And he says, Neville Marriner. And I said, really? I didn't know that he went from conducting to clarinet. He goes, I mean Andrew, okay? So what I want to ask you is, how many music directors have you played under in the London Symphony, and who were they, and how have they? What were their effects on the orchestra, and you? Okay, and all clean language, please, Andrew. We have some youngsters listening.
That's fine by me. I mean, that's a question that in itself would take about 4.5 hours to
That's a
discuss.
problem. All
But
my questions are like that.
let me give you a quick answer. The first music director we had who appointed me was Claudio Abbado.
Okay.
Then it was Michael Tilson Thomas. Then it was Colin Davis. Then Gergiev, and finally Simon Rattle. So I was really, really lucky with that particular run of music directors, and I think all of my professional colleagues will tell you that if you get on with the music director, that is halfway to enjoying a musical career, because if you're on the same wavelength musically and even personally, then being in an orchestra is a wonderful, wonderful place to be. If that's not the case, I'm told it's not much fun. And maybe with one or two guest conductors, I could get a sense of what it's like to find oneself a little discomforted by that. But I mean, Abbado was absolutely amazing. I was green as anything, and it was really down to him that I was appointed. And Michael was incredible in that he transformed the orchestra, both musically and personally. That the LSO that I joined was quite a swashbuckling institution. It was almost entirely male. It had some pretty rough edges, both musically and in its way of operating, and particularly in the way it toured. And Michael brought an amazing gift of making it possible to even allow yourself to express the fact that you enjoyed the music and the music you were making together. And this was a rather unmacho thing at that time. Orchestras were so macho that even to give some demonstration that you were really enjoying the music was really not on. Michael transformed that, and he did it by not only his personal approach with the players, but also some extraordinary musical performances and an expansion of the repertoire that a London orchestra had probably only encountered in the studio, but it was a really eclectic repertoire that he brought to the orchestra.
Which pieces? What for the repertoire?
Well, we hadn't really done. I mean, under Claudio, we'd done a lot of Mahler, obviously, and French music. But Michael brought a whole swathe of American composers, a lot more contemporary music. It really opened up a great deal. He brought the concept of talking about the music to the audience. He played the piano. He played concertos with us. It was a much more all-embracing thing. It's hard to think of that as groundbreaking now, but he broke the ground certainly in the UK for us there, and we're forever grateful to him for that. And we gave some pretty amazing performances under his baton. And so he stayed for a good length of time. And when Colin Davis arrived, of course, he brought with him a specialist repertoire: Sibelius, Mozart, but the Berlioz, of course, all those wonderful Berlioz pieces that had been neglected since Monteur's days. We really, we went through all the operas, and Sibelius was not particularly top of the hit list in London in those days. And those symphonies, in fact, we brought them to the States. We took them to Chicago and to New York and played the full symphonic cycle. And these were extraordinary musical experiences for me, really intense. He was an enabler. he just let you play, which of course any orchestral musician quite enjoys, rather than the rather more dictated version. He let you play, and if, as very often happened with me, you got a bit too expansive, he would very politely and gently, just during a concert, just make a gesture that brought you back in line so that we were able to finish the concert on the same day we started. He was a really wonderful, collaborative artist, and that was terrific years. Would you like me to stop now, or shall I go on to get?
No, one thing is, of course, Sir Colin was a clarinet player, wasn't
he? Yeah, and rather a
good
one. You know, it's fashionable to say, "Oh yes." In fact, somebody did once when Colin asked for something difficult in the horns. And he said, "Oh, I can't be that difficult." And they said, "Colin, playing an instrument isn't always straightforward, as those of us who've heard you play the clarinet can attest." I think he was a good clarinetist.
I just want to say we have a lot of people already tuning in, and some wonderful comments. But to give you an idea of some of the people, the caliber, we have John Brussier, a mutual friend of ours for the Chicago Symphony, who wanted to let us all know that he played Rachmaninoff's Second Symphony in 1981 at the Ravinia Festival with the Chicago Symphony. And you know who the conductor was?
I can guess.
Who?
Was it Neville?
Sir Neville, to you.
Terrific. Well, I hope he got an easy ride with my father. That would be good to hear. But great to know that he's listening as well. And it's a long time since we've had contact, but it's happy memories. Yeah.
Yes. And well, speaking of which, you also had an official position as the principal clarinet of the St. Martin's Academy as well, no?
Yes. Yeah, we got round the usual rule that you can't have two gigs by saying, well, the Academy of St. Martin's is a chamber orchestra. Well, of course, it was recording all the orchestral repertoire as time went on. But yeah, that was a bit of a manic period. I mean, it was only about 10 or 12 years, but it was tricky keeping both in the end. It sort of went year by year. One year the LSO would say, "Hey, where the hell have you been?" And you go, "Oh, I'm sorry." So you'd be back in the LSO the following year, and then the Academy would say, "Well, where the hell have you been?" And so you take it year by year to take your punishment like a man, and try and get the schedule lined up so people didn't complain too much.
Didn't you tell me a story once of wasn't there someone who played an audition for one of the positions in one of the two orchestras, and his CV said principal clarinet of the London Symphony and the St. Martin's Academy? You were reading this as he's playing for you. Wasn't there something like that?
That did happen, yes. And the interview at the end of the audition was quite interesting. Yeah. Well, but I mean, the thing about doing both was amazing. I do remember one particular day when in the morning I recorded Brahms' Serenade No. 1 with the Academy of St. Martin's. And then I crossed London, and in the afternoon I recorded Brahms' Serenade No. 1 with the London Symphony Orchestra. That was quite something. So anybody who bought either of those records, you could have saved your money. You got the same mistakes on both. Yeah.
Well, by the way, just make sure I have it right. Your dad was actually a violinist in the LSO to start out with. Is that right?
He was. He, in fact, to start with, he was in a string quartet. He was the second violin in the Martin string quartet, he was in the Martin string quartet. In fact, they got a letter once addressed to dear Mr. String, because they thought it was the Martin string quartet. But hey, so first he was in that, then he went to the LSO, and actually Douglas, who you referred to earlier, he's legged it now, but he set up the tech on this. He's just drawn my attention to a performance on YouTube by the LSO in 1966 with Bernstein conducting of the Rite of Spring. That is some of the most staggeringly technically virtuosic conducting I've ever seen. The Rite of Spring conductors are boppy, billow, boppy, billow. No subdivisions, but actually more accurate than most of the people who are flailing around. Absolutely staggering. And that was in the LSO for a while under Pierre Monteur, with whom he then went off to study conducting, and that's how he ended up um, beating time.
But did now do I have it right that he actually started rehearsing just for practice and creating the group, the St. Martin's Academy in the Fields, in your house, just getting the boys out, and literally was founded in your house? Is
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1959. But I mean, not just when they formed, it went on for years and years and years that they used the front room as the rehearsal venue. And my mum was the fixer and the paymaster and the everything. It was a one person office. And in fact, the office turned out to be, it had to be my bedroom. So I had a youth of having to get up in the morning to vacate the premises so that the orchestra could be administered.
Well, one of the most charming things I find in London is these plaques. They say, these historical places that, such and such had a beer here once, and this is where. And I always have this fantasy that one day there's going to be a plaque in front of your house saying the St. Martin's Academy in the Fields Orchestra was founded here.
I think that's a good idea. It's a very good. I think there are certain rules applied to qualification for that, but maybe one day it'll qualify.
Well, it's. I have to say, I'm glad that there's a tremendous space separating us. We've known each other for quite a while, and I've always thought I was always very nervous about sort of bringing up your father, because obviously, you're so accomplished in your own right, and you never know what complicated chemistry might come from that. But now that we're far away and you can't hit me, I want to talk a little bit about that. I mean, first of all, what's it like being the principal clarinet of an orchestra where your dad is the conductor? I mean, what's that dynamic? Is he especially nasty to you? Is he especially nice to you? Do you feel particularly let down if you don't play as well as you thought? I mean, what was that dynamic like, and how many years did you play in the orchestra with him?
Well, I mean, they're all good questions, those, and I mean, the glib answer was, if the clarinet intonation was terrible, he said, "For God's sake, clarinet, you're out of tune, and try it again," and that, and then it sort of exasperated as we tried to get it in the can in the recording studio, and he'd say, "Right, that's it, no pocket money next week," and it would sort of break the ice, in the studio, as people thought, okay, here we go. But in fact, you're right to flag it up. I mean, firstly, a sort of mea culpa that there's no doubt in my mind that the world is full of extremely accomplished clarinet players, and I got a lucky break. I got a lucky break getting into the LSO. I got a lucky break all the way along the line because I was brought up in a musical atmosphere, musical background. I knew the ropes, and so I knew what needed to be done in order to qualify to work with an orchestra. Having done that, I think I was careful to get established before I went into the Academy of St. Martin's, because there were examples around that time of friends of mine who were also had the good fortune and at the same time the misfortune to be born into a musical family, and they used their get out of jail card free a little bit too early when they weren't ready for it. And I felt very strongly that I had to prove myself independently. And that was probably much influenced by my dad's approach anyway. So we were on the same page with that one. However, when the opportunity arose, nepotism is a wonderful thing I can't recommend it more strongly. And anybody else who has the good fortune to have a parent who can say, come and play the Mozart clarinet concerto with me, I'm going to Bologna or somewhere where the food is great, then, seize that opportunity. I did wait, and then I couldn't resist it any longer. The idea of going, as it were, on holiday with your father to exotic places was too much to resist. And musically, I'm of course his greatest fan. The only difficulty for me was that his style of music making was really based on precision. That the sort of because of it being a string-based orchestra and wind only added later, they had developed this incredible clarity of style, which was technically phenomenally demanding for wind players. And maybe I had evolved a style that took a lot of effort to shift to the academy style of that level of clarity, and that was tricky. On the personal side, it was great working with him, but you touched on something. Yes, there was an extra level of responsibility on both sides. I think he got nervous for me, and I'd like to say, you're playing the concerto. You don't want to let your fathers out, and but we had some great times. And I do remember, actually, you mentioned New World earlier. We did play the Mozart down at New World.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was great. Because I go down to, have been down to New World a few times this year as well. But over the years, I've been down there to work with the guys, and it's been terrific. But one year, Michael got us to go down to do the Mozart, and all was going well. Short overture to start with, and I was ready to walk on the stage after the overture. And Dad came off, and there was a great kerfuffle going around. And eventually, some stagehand appeared with an enormous roll of duct tape, black duct tape. At which point, we discovered that during the overture, one rather vigorous movement or upbeat of my father had actually ripped the seam of his trousers right down the middle. And the audience was getting a festive treat. And so the only way to do it was to sort him out at the side of the stage. And so, that moment when you realize it's time to go on and give your all, this was deferred by at least 3 minutes while they duct taped up his trousers so that he wasn't causing alarm.
There was nothing compared to the Sibelius break. I mean,
well, exactly. I mean, these things happen.
That's great. In fact, I mean, we've known each other quite a long time, and I remember quite a long time ago you had just done a tour with him, maybe in Asia, doing Mozart. Maybe you were in Malaysia. Does that sound familiar?
I'm not sure I can remember. Maybe we did.
Well, and I remember you came over, you gave some classes as you did quite a bit, and you were playing me a recording of it, a live recording, and it really went well. And you were really quite seemingly satisfied. And I know you're your hardest critic, exactly. So you're surprised, and I'm surprised. But there was one little glitch somewhere, and you really, I mean, you were physically upset about it, and you said exactly what you just said. I remember you said something like, you want to do this for your father, you want to have that perfect concert, and it really was going well, and that bloody 2 notes could have been better. And I remember you were, it's stuck in my mind 15, 20 years later, you were physically disappointed about it.
Well, I think I still feel that about Mozart. In fact, I've stopped playing it. I mean, as well, we've all stopped playing for the moment, but I mean, this has been a perfect opportunity to acknowledge that piece is the holy grail, and it gets more difficult. And I mean, I can well believe that I was upset listening to it back. The first bit where you said I thought it sounded okay, That comes as a surprise. I suspect you're talking about, it was probably Australia or something I was coming back from if I was coming through Hong Kong again. But maybe we did it in the forest as well. Maybe Japan and
I could be wrong. Yeah,
yeah.
but I remember that.
But the thing is, yeah, I mean, you're always going to be pretty much disappointed with hearing your own recordings back. There's no way around that. He was the same. Dad was the same, actually. If he had the misfortune to hear back his recordings, I mean, he had to listen to them, obviously, for to make judgments about the way forward. But I mean, he wouldn't sit down and listen to his own recordings for pleasure. He would listen to his heroes. But there was one occasion where he had the car radio on, and he caused a traffic accident because he was listening to a broadcast that they'd done. You know, we have in London those deferred broadcasts. So an hour after they finished, they're sent out. And he was driving home from the broadcast, heard some of it, and Mr. Red Light. He was so upset. So, yeah, I mean, listening to your own recordings, I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't get a greater deal of pleasure out of that. Only regrets.
Well, we want to, you know, you're far too humble and classy to self-promote. But the good news, I'm not. So why don't you share some of why don't you share some of your recordings with it? I mean, where can we find your CDs? And also, I know that recently-ish, you did some publications, you've done some arrangements and so forth. So if we wanted to, you know, access you, in fact, Lorenzo, who's here, but in fact, it needs to be said, and I have to thank him, our friend David Cooper, who's in the Chicago Symphony, has started to do this. And we were big fans. I've been watching a lot of his interviews, including with John Ye, and they're really terrific. And Lorenzo came in, and I said, you know, I really enjoy those. He goes, you know, Andy, I think you should do these things. And I said, well, I don't know the first thing about techie and all that. And he goes, okay, I will help you under two conditions, non-negotiable. First, Andrew Marriner is the first person you interview.
Oh.
Second, you have to promise that you don't dominate the conversation. So, I guaranteed him one. Okay, so I'm at a 50% now. But why don't we talk about some of your CDs? Where can we find them? What are they? Who are they with?
Well, the CDs, my goodness, there are still CDs. They some of them started lives as LPs. Of course, they've been knocking around so long, but. Probably the best way to identify them is to go to my website, which does exist. I was bullied into making one at some stage, andrewmarinerclarinet.com, I think it is. Okay. And at some stage, I was brave enough to put up a discography there. So that's got pretty much all the concertos up until 2013, when I made the website, and was probably the last time I did anything with it. But that coincided. So the CDs are there: Finzi, Mozart, what else?
Weber, I remember.
Oh gosh, yes, I remember the Webers. That's a long time ago. Yeah, that was in the 80s. But actually, funnily enough, somebody made me sit down and listen to it the other day, a pupil. Because he wanted to know something about style and editing, and I said, well, what about this? And he said, well, that's not what you do on the record. Anyway, so I think the Weber was a good one. Yeah, the Weber and the Finzi I'm very fond of. There were two Mozarts. There's about to be another Mozart with the London Symphony. Wow. My sort of valedictory performance will come out on...
Who's conducting?
Jaime Martin, my great flute-playing friend who turned conductor, who was a protege of my dad's, played first flute in the academy for however many years, and is now very well established as a conductor. And so we've done that. But 2013, I set up the website which has the discography, and it also has the books to which you refer, which are those. The one that sells at the moment is the one with the Schubert and the Verdi and the Rachmaninoff. Rachmaninoff slow movement arranged for B flat, clarinet, and piano. Very useful to have for those who don't own an A clarinet. Not much fun for the pianist, I suspect. But the companion piece, which I bet you've never played, but I keep giving you a copy of, is the Rossini. Did I give you a copy of that?
Yes, you did give me a copy. I have it before, and now I have to. Now
you have to look at it. It's really fantastic, but it started life, of course. It's part of the Messa di Gloria of Rossini that the Academy recorded 25 years ago. And you know what it's like. You go to a recording session and you wonder what on earth's going to come. But 3 days before this session, they warned me that there is an obbligato part in this Rossini mass, and it's a mass that nobody ever plays. And after the event, I was so struck with the major clarinet involvement in this piece that I transcribed it, and including the bass voice. But it's got some ferocious octaves that poppy, 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 that would test even your advanced abilities, Andy. I know you fly around the instrument, but it's quite a piece. And those two were my sort of. I had a mini sabbatical in 2013, and that's what I was doing at that time. Was doing those publications.
And in fact, I wanted to ask you about the sabbatical. What I also remember is that you were doing a lot of playing. As opposed to mine, where I just said I'm a little bit burnt out, and there's a chance for me to do everything I've ever wanted to do and couldn't. Of course, there was some music involved. But what about your sabbatical? You were playing with like 4 different orchestras at once, and you were doing publications. What made you take the sabbatical? What did you get out of the sabbatical? When you returned to the orchestra, how had you changed? How were you affected?
That's a difficult question to answer in public, but I think I did need a break from the orchestra. When you get the schedule and you see how heavy the London schedules are for the symphony orchestras, then clarinet players the world over say, gosh, you guys in London, you work yourself to the bone. And it is true. And if you've been doing that for 30 odd years, then it's healthy just to take put your head outside the studio door and take a breath of fresh air. And one of the things that had always interested me was that we're all very insular. We're all so loyal to our orchestras that we actually don't pay attention to the other orchestras around the world and around our own country. And so what I thought would be useful and did was just say to the other orchestras, by the way, I'm around for a few months. What do you think? And of course, they all have emergencies of one sort or the other. So I went into 4 or 5 different orchestras just to get the flavor of how they make their music, how they live their lives day to day. And it was fascinating. It was a great breath of fresh air and a great education. And added to that, in the same time, of course, I went off to do all sorts of teaching projects around the world, which was, again, listening to other people play the clarinet is now my professional preference. I love listening to other people play well. And that wasn't always the case. I was always slightly envious, as you know, when you play the Corridiano. I was so impressed that I expressed myself in flamboyant terms. But yeah, so I mean, the teaching thing was great. I also, of course, was working with Dario at that time. I went out to the factory, did some teaching trips. It was a very good time, and I did feel when I went back that it was good to have seen something else for a while.
Right.
And I then stayed on for another 7 years, which included, of course, the Simon Rattle years, the first 2 or 3 years of his tenure at the LSO.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, we've I thought this would be a great interview to have some shout outs to quasi recently late prominent musicians. One, of course, was Leonard Bernstein, who was in the news with his LB 100, and then another one, unfortunately, was your dad. But I thought that we would talk a little bit about Hans Deinzer, who was your teacher in Germany, and why don't we talk about what was that like? I mean, going to Germany and studying with him, and what it did for you, and so on.
Well, I mean, Hans, bless him, he passed away in February, and he'd been ill for a good few years. He was the most extraordinary man, and he was exceptionally kind to me, and a great teacher. Um, I mean, his list includes Sabina, Meyer, Rainer Wähler, Sabina's husband.
They were with you, weren't they? Contemporaries of
They were
yours?
all the same time, yeah. Wolfgang Meyer, the same. There were a few more players, German players, well known. And then Michel Tsukowski, of course, was a Deinzer pupil. And Martin Frost at a much later stage, I mean, 25 years on from us. But so he did have quite a stable of successes. And he was brilliant with me, because when I turned up, I thought I already could play the clarinet. But he very gently disabused me of that. And I was really one of the idiots of the class. I just sat at the back watching Sabina and Rainer and Wolfgang play the pants off everything, but I listened and absorbed everything that he said, and I really benefited from his kindness and the rigor of his teaching. Because maybe in London, I'd had lessons with Jack Brymer, which was wonderful, but it was all by example. You know, here's a Brahms sonata, this is how I play it. There was very little at the time actual technical technical work going in any system going into building a technique, and Hans was absolutely rigorous in that demand. And the idea of sound production is, you know, based on everything that he said. And the German Hochschule system, where you have a breathing teacher, which is quite extraordinary. And in fact, it's something that I send my pupils to now in the Guildhall in London. So Hans was a wonderful human being, a wonderful clarinetist. But of course, in Germany, you couldn't be in an orchestra and be a professor, so he chose the teaching path. And I think that suited him enormously, and to the benefit of so many players.
You know, Andrew, since we're getting international, and some of the youngsters might not really relate to what I'm about to say, but first of all, I mean, you did study in Germany. You mentioned Jack Brymer. Wasn't he in the section when you joined the London Symphony?
Yes, very much so. Yeah, I mean, he was the principal clarinet, and there was a celebration concert. I think it must have been his 70th would have been 84. Yeah, so it was at his 70th where I'd already signed a contract to start with the orchestra, and dear Jack strode to the front of the stage and said, "The orchestra have begged me to stay." At which point, so I was guest principal for my first year, and he was guest principal for. He turned to guest principal when I took over completely.
Well, but what I'd like to ask you, I mean, when we were growing up, I think it was very clear these national schools of clarinet playing. You get on the radio and say, that's British clarinet playing, okay? And to me, he was, you know, the quintessential, or one of the quintessential British, you know, the I guess 10/10s or Abruzzi, this sort of thing. If you talk to people in Britain, I remember talking to Thea King, whose late husband Frederick Thurston, where she thought that was a different style, and then the British clarinet sound went into a very specific area. And in my mind, you kind of were a bridge. Things have changed again today. You had some elements of that and moved it a little bit. But more importantly, I mean, almost everyone's playing on the same equipment today. And you used to know immediately, oh, that's this, that this is the French school, this is this when you turn the radio. And now, talk a little bit about that. Has that disappeared a little bit? And is it a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's a mixture of everything. I mean, I think it's a good thing. The thing about Jack's playing was he was a great, great artist who had managed to find a way of vocalizing on the clarinet that very few people could do. And I think that English clarinet playing benefited from his playing, but maybe suffered in that there were a lot of pale imitations of that coupled with a lack of grounding in the technique of producing sound, meant that English clarinet playing, I think, weathered a difficult periods along the way. And so I think the business of well-produced sound that you will have encountered when you were growing up with Marcellus, with Harold Wright, that sort of classy production of sound was something that wasn't always available in the UK. There was some very individual playing, some wonderfully engaging playing, but there wasn't either the well-formed playing that flowed from that, or much of the teaching that was able to substantiate what was being done. So I feel a bit of a turncoat, abandoning the so-called English school, but I wouldn't call it so much the English school as a sort of English habit, and it didn't feel to be much of a school. It felt like an individualistic expression of something that could very easily have turned a different way with different ideas. So yes, I betrayed the English school. I'm sorry about that, but not very.
But my memory doesn't serve well enough. Didn't you have some experience maybe with Harold Wright? Did you study at Tanglewood or something, or do I have it all?
I did, yeah. Yeah, I did. I studied in one of those sheds in a field in with Harold Wright. He was wonderful. He was wonderful. And I mean, I was there principally just to listen to him play in the concerts. But I did sneak a few lessons, and that was out of this world.
Great.
Yeah. I mean, I still listened to, I have a friend who has, I should have known up to this, but has some of the air checks from those days. Specifically listening to Harold Wright playing, and I've got some of those that are just out of this world.
Wow. I just say, I've been hoping to get all the geeky things. We have a lot of clarinets, but your stories are really, I mean, the just life in a British orchestra and all that stuff. I don't want to get too far from it. So I actually have a story. When I was in London in July, as you know, I'm a big tennis fan, and you are to some degree, and therefore I've had the opportunity to meet you many, many times in London. So I made it to Wimbledon, and my friend who had the tickets had a flat tire on one of the days we were going to go. So I have this written down because I'm so bad with names. And no, not a flat tire. We the battery was out, and we just didn't know what to do. And we were running late, and I flew literally from Asia to see 2 days of Wimbledon and see you about 3 days after your retirement. And who comes out but his next door neighbor to help us charge it? And it was Roger Parrott, who played Sir Neville Chamberlain in the movie King's Speech. Okay, so I didn't realize that. My friend said, "Oh, he's a pretty good actor." My neighbor. I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "King's Speech, sure, that's terrific." And so I had sort of the quintessential Yankee British tourist experience. I mean, I was at Wimbledon, King's Speech, okay? I met him, and then I went to meet you afterwards. And of course, when I went to hear King's Speech, or see King's Speech, I heard several minutes of the orchestra playing the introduction of the Mozart Clarinet Concerto. I said, wow, this is, surely, I mean, this is just the beginning. Now we're going to hear lots and lots of clarinet, and I wonder who it is. I wonder if I know him. And then I heard 3 seconds of clarinet or thereabouts, and then I waited all the way to the end of the credits, only to find out that it was you, okay? So I thought, wow, I met 2 people. I went to meet you that evening, so I met 2 people from King's Speech, and I think that was quite an experience too. So what was that, being the accredited soloist for a famous Oscar-winning, Academy Award-winning movie?
Well, as you say, I mean, I played not a major role in the overall whole film.
How many bullets was it, actually? Maybe I'm exaggerating.
It was hilarious. I mean, I was actually been on holiday and got the call saying, we're thinking of using the Mozart concerto. Would you do it? And I thought, I'm on holiday, but it's always the slow movement, out of Africa, or the number of times I recorded the slow movement, even for Victoria's Secret in-house music on one occasion. But so you assume it's going to be the slow movement. So you say, yeah, sure. Then, go up and blow the dust off the clarinet from your holiday. And then suddenly they phone back and say, no, it's the first movement. So I go, oh, well, I've been on holiday. Well, okay, so you go and do a bit of practice. Of course, when I got to the studio, apart from the fact that the actual session time was running very, very late, so we didn't get to the Mozart till 10 minutes to the finish. I had one shot at it. He'd done this terrible edit on it to make it obviously work with the film. So it wasn't just like playing the Mozart. It had this slightly curious edit in it. And of course, most of the music involved is the orchestral ritornello. So you have ching pong, and then you're done. So I think I must be, you're generous if you say there's 8 bars of clarinet in it. But it was great. And there are all sorts of movies where you suddenly think, oh yes, I vaguely remember doing that. Because over the years, we've done a lot. Sort of Braveheart and some Harry Potter, and in the old days, the Star Wars before they went back to America, and endless array of English rom-coms, so yeah, you get used to that, but you soon forget you've done them until you're reminded by switching on the radio or something.
Great. Let's get a little geeky, okay? And we can move around. So first of all, age-old question: do clarinets blow out? Okay, some people say, oh, after 8 years, you have to throw it away and get a new one. I know you've been playing virtually your whole career on one, isn't that right? At Festival of the
the B flat I've been playing on since 1986, I think. Yeah. Because we have passports for them, so it's written on there, 1986. And so the answer to your question is yes, they do blow out, which is why my intonation is not very good at the moment. I'm very, very fond of my old clarinet, and every time I consider getting a new one, I thought, well, you're not going to be playing for that much longer, so why change? But I think they do blow out. I think more just to do maybe with the intonation, although that could be geriatric ears. But I think the intonation does shift a bit with the bore. And I admire people who can shift instruments just like that. I think people who play E flat and bass and basset horn and that are probably better at shifting from a new instrument, from an old instrument to a new instrument. And of course, I've never done any of the other instruments. I've always stuck with the B flat and A. So I'm less well equipped to make the change. And that's probably why I stuck with it. But I do have a spare pair that I play on occasionally.
And let's have a little bit of a shout out to Mr. Sato in Tokyo.
Oh yes.
So he's a repair. Andrew had complained that he just couldn't get his old instrument to work properly, and I put him in touch with someone that I use quite frequently in Tokyo. And you were in residence for a week or something, and he basically, I guess, got it back to certainly usable, if not as good.
Yeah, I mean, most people had written off that instrument and said you can't continue to play on this heap. But Sato-san did it twice. He did it last year again. So it lasted about 3 years from his first involvement with the instrument to the last time he did it, which was just last year.
Great.
And a genius. Yeah, of course, he'd worked at the Van Doren factory for years and years in France. Yeah.
Van Doren.
Oh my God! Did I? I'm sorry.
Well, there's another side to you. I mean, I've always known you as a teacher. Certainly, I mean, that's how I got to know you. You used to come to Hong Kong. In those days, Anthony Camden, who I believe was kind of a champion of yours, he was principal oboe for a long time in London Symphony, and then he became the head of of our music academy in Hong Kong for quite a while, and he of course was very fond of Andrew and brought him in. And you didn't just come for a class. I mean, you used to come for like 2 weeks or something, and really spend 8 hours a day, and not just once. I mean, really quite often. But I've attended enough of your classes to know that you'd always start. And I'm like, okay, what am I going to get out of this next? After hearing his classes for 14 days and the next year another 14, what am I going to get? And you would start the whole week and you'd say, now listen, I don't say much, but what I say frequently. Okay, so why don't you share as a teacher? I mean, everyone's very curious because I know now you're spending a lot more time. You've always regretted you haven't been able to give the fair dues that you wanted to, and you've really shared with me you're just crazy about teaching. So and you're doing more of that now, presumably online at the moment. But
absolutely, yeah, the online teaching, it's tricky because of course the online teaching is only as good as the weakest part of the technology. So it's all very well having a fancy microphone up here, but if somebody's listening on a tin can and a piece of string, it's not going to sound great. So you can't do much of the intricate work. But I was thinking about this online. I started teaching online in 2004 because New World Symphony, of course, were the groundbreakers in that. And I just found an article online about online teaching, and I was involved in it, and it was 2004 in the New World. So that, I mean, obviously at the moment that's playing a major role. But the whole teaching thing, I've really enjoyed, and yes, coming to the APA all those times was always a treat. It felt like a second home for a while. And also just traveling around, listening to young players coming through, and hopefully offering them something that they can hang on to, because it's tough being a student. I think everybody would like to get to the stage where, having studied, they can now do it and get out there and play in the orchestra. And why aren't there enough jobs in orchestras? And why don't you retire? Because we need renewal. And it's absolutely true that being a student is tough. But if you skip some of the process, then that promised land isn't going to happen. Not anymore. When I got in, standards were obviously not as high. But now there is so much accomplished playing that if you skip a bit in terms of production, in terms of technical ability, and then musical understanding, there's too many of us out there for one to be able to go, as one used to, oh well, never mind, maybe we can just do that bit. It doesn't work. It worked for me, but it won't work in the present day. So I'm really happy to help people through those. I think one of the things about teaching is, if you've made all the mistakes there are to make, like I have, on an instrument, you sure as hell know how to set about fixing them. And I enjoy that bit. And nothing now gives me more pleasure than listening to somebody else play a wonderful Debussy Rhapsody or something like that.
Well, Andrew, that sounds very flowery and fantastic, but we want to hear some nitty gritty. When you start and you say, I say very few things, but I say them often. What are the kinds of things that you're always? I mean, someone who's heard so much clarinet playing, has played everywhere, has heard people all over the world all the time. I mean, what are those few things you always keep coming back to?
I think the simplicity of production. I'm obsessed by the sound production and how you get your voice across a symphony orchestra. Because of course the transition from being a student in a practice room to playing where you got 10 French horns and 5 trombones and goodness knows what going on behind you, is developing a sound that doesn't break up when it gets loud. The most difficult thing on the clarinet, I believe, is this breakup of the sound as the dynamic gets louder. And also the wetness, the softness in the sound when people are playing quietly, so quietly that you go, ooh, ah, but you can't hear it. So the idea is that a pianissimo should travel to the back of a 3,000-seater concert hall as clearly and effectively as a fortissimo, without change in the quality of the sound. And how you achieve that is a fairly tortuous process that is based on where the sound originates, the diaphragmatic support, this sort of mantra that we have about the diaphragm, but nobody really knows much about it because we can't see it. We can barely, well, we can feel it, but we're not in biology, we're not really as clarinet players clear about how that bit works unless you work really hard and have some sort of connection and something to relate to. So diaphragmatic breathing, the shape of the air as it comes up and through. There are things that I think we've all been taught that sounded good when we were being taught them, but may get in the way. For instance, the first thing that Miss says when you've got a recorder and you're 6 years old is don't raise your shoulders. And how many people do you know who sit there not raising their shoulders by a very strong physical movement that creates enormous tension? So something that was designed to release tension turns into something that creates tension. The same with the business of, oh, you must play with an open throat. Well, yes and no. And the throat must not obviously be closed, and there mustn't be a tightening of the throat. But the whole idea that you should open the throat like a wide-mouthed frog means that you get a sort of hernia in the sound. This goes, so the L come up, go and out through the instrument, and that is the cause of so much uneven playing in the clarinet. Just this whole concept of you must open the throat wide. It basically it's like getting a garden hose that's got a great blister on the side. That if a garden hose has to be nice and straight so that you get that clear, fast column of water coming out, and any kink in it, so a closed throat, will slow the water to a trickle, and any blister on it will make it go bloop. It will also alter the flow detrimentally. So, those are things that really form a major.
It's funny you mentioned. I actually was going to address that specifically because maybe you've had the same experience, or your students have had the experience. Sometimes you hear 20 different people say roughly the same thing in just a different way. And number 21 uses a different word, and all of a sudden you just connect with it. And I had that experience with you on the open throat. Now I'm gonna relay the way I understood it, and you're gonna probably tell me that I've been wrong for 20 years, and don't worry about it. So please tell me. But I agree. I mean, I always heard as a kid, open your throat, open your throat. And then it seemed to me that most people were interpreting that as the vowel being a very O or whatever. And you explained it that it's not a passive word. It's a I mean, it's not an active word. It's a passive word. When if you're saying open your throat, that's because someone's actively closing their throat. What you really mean is don't close your throat. It's not, you're constantly activating to open, open, open. Did I get it right?
Absolutely.
Oh,
Yep.
phew. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks a
I mean,
lot.
you know, we share a lot of the same ideas about playing a clarinet, and we've been to each other's classes, and the number of times that we've said to each other, "Well, I tell them that every week, but I mean, you come along, and then suddenly it makes sense, and it works both ways. We both have that, and it is different ways of saying maybe the same thing, but also there are certain ideas that about sound production that I think are fairly critical to making the clarinet sound less like the misery stick that it has its unfortunate reputation for.
Great. Well, I still have some questions. Are you with me? Are you okay?
I'm fine with this. I'm be very surprised if anybody's still awake. But
Let's take this opportunity. I deeply apologize. I don't know everybody here, but I can tell you we've got a huge amount of people who said here. We have, of course, I mentioned John Ye from the Chicago Symphony, Alexander Fitterstein from the Peabody Conservatory, Nicholas Cox, a friend of yours, who's a teacher up in Manchester.
And he's another dancer pupil.
That's right. Yep. We've got Gonzalo Esteban, principal of the Malaysia Philharmonic, and Matt Larson, who's also a member, and it goes on. Sarah Watts, a professor higher up, and Christine McDonald, a classmate of mine from Juilliard from 5 years ago when we were there. Varga Gabor from his orchestra in Hungary. It's a Maury Bakun. We've got all kinds of people tuning in from all over the world, and please let me know. This is the first time. Oh, sorry, Pascual Martinez Forteza from the New York Philharmonic. We share the same boss at the moment, so he's kind of like family. And so everyone, please share if you're enjoying this, if I should keep this series going. I mean, I will have fulfilled my promise to Lorenzo, who led Andrew's section for 8 years and left him to lead mine for 5 years, as all bass clarinetists seem to, but we love him anyway. We have Dan Gilbert for University of Michigan. He's been in the Cleveland Orchestra, and also a classmate of mine at Juilliard, and so on. Wow! I have people I haven't seen in decades. All have big orchestras. Someone from Swedish orchestra that was a classmate of mine way back at Juilliard. So anyway, it's not going to waste over there, and I hope you're not getting too nervous, Andrew, because this is all being documented.
It's certainly a bit more daunting than it started out, I must say. Yeah. But hi to all. Yeah.
Well, I mean, let's talk about what we're all avoiding at this moment. We tried to escape from, and you can't avoid it, other than when you're sleeping. This awful situation that we're facing in the arts at present. And I saw an interview recently with Simon Rattle, who was talking about a friend of his was saying, this isn't true. We are essential workers. We're the sanitation officers of the soul. Now, I mean, what is the role of a musician in normal times? Is it important? Why is it important? And is it important now? And what do you make of the short term, medium, and long-term future of the performing arts?
You're talking to the wrong person here, really. I'm profoundly distressed by the potential for the arts to be the last people to be helped back into activity. I understand the physical distancing aspects, but I think that somebody like Simon is such a brilliant spokesman for the arts that he would be the perfect person in this country to be called in to try and make the case for the arts to be rebuilt in some sort of meaningful way. That I've been following some of the things that John Bruce has been putting online about the difficulties that we face, and he's obviously very involved with that and the dilemmas it proposes. I don't have any solutions. I just think that we're going to be a long way down the pecking order. And it's hard to argue the case when medical supplies are in short demand, that budgets should be diverted towards something else. But that is always the lame excuse that the arts suffers from anyway, that we are not considered an essential service. And it is easy to make a short-term case for that. But if you look at the rise in mental distress that something like the last few months has caused, then the arts is going to be a lot more necessary than maybe the wider world appreciates at the moment.
Let me actually interject, because a lot of my colleagues from around the world have been interested. Actually, well, I think all orchestral players are sort of keeping tabs on what's going on, but because in Asia, most of us sort of got this early on, or got this, not the virus, but what we're hit with this. A lot of people are especially looking at us, and I can tell you, just a couple of hours ago, we haven't worked. Our last concert was January 23rd. That's how far back I'm going. But they've just announced. I mean, just 2 hours ago, we're in a different way, but we're setting up for business in 2 weeks. We're doing a Siegfried's smaller stuff, a Mozart Grand Partita. We still, believe it or not, have a Korea tour scheduled. Who knows? That's the end of June, because apparently some of the countries that have, it needs to be said, we haven't had a death here in about 2 months, and we haven't had a new case in about 16 or 17 days. So it seems that some of the countries that are doing well are starting to establish relationships about getting in and out with quarantine and stuff like that. So I just want people to know, hang in there, because you never know. I mean, it might not be as far away as you think. So, just passing along a little bit of hope, and we're looking forward to getting back and, doing what we like to do and what we do best. Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know what? I really spoiled it, because for an hour and a half I was having such a good time, and it's probably the first time I haven't heard anything about this bloody thing, and I'm the person who ruined this magic spell. Let's get away from that. Okay. But generally speaking, 4 months ago, what would you have told? I mean, well, your son, I mean, it's not in the same field, but he is a reasonably accomplished jazz drummer. He's been studying and working in New York City, of course. What do you tell people sort of his age, 18 to 25 or whatever? What kind of advice? I mean, I think you gave some good advice already when you said you can't skip the training side. I mean, as you said, I'm sure a lot of freelancing and breaking in has to do with some level of politics and this sort of thing. But what you're really saying was, please take care of business first. I mean, because no longer can you ride on those sort of coattails. Generally, other than that, do you have just advice that you would give to people that have been working as hard as you did in Germany and like music just as much as you, and are hoping to be the next Andrew Marriner or whatever?
I think the one thing that we have the advantage of, having studied that long ago, was we had to work incredibly hard to have access to the resources. And now, of course, with Spotify, with everything available online, it is so overwhelming that you could spend most of your study time listening to stuff in a slightly unfocused way and not actually developing the instincts that you need for good orchestral playing. And what I discover, and have run-ins with my pupils all the time, is that the context of what they're doing and what the ultimate aim is to make music, to share music. And if, for instance, you're doing your third year orchestral excerpt exam and you haven't actually listened to those pieces, what does that say about your desire to join that profession? There are people who are saying, I'm desperate because I must audition, and I've prepared my excerpts. And then you say, but what about the rest of the piece? And you might discover that they haven't even listened to the complete symphony. And whilst I think it's an obvious prerequisite to listen to it, it begs the further point about, if you don't want to listen to this music in its entirety and discover about it and different interpretations, then are you entering the right profession? Because I think a lot of people go to music college thinking, oh, well, it'll be all right, it'll be lovely. But I think you have to have the most extraordinary desire to live with this music and absorb it and if you don't have that absolute need, then go and do something else in an amateur fashion. But
isn't that, I mean, need or have to? I mean, these are the words that we should be using. In fact, I think that's probably one of the reasons I'm such an unpopular teacher, is because all this, oh, he's so inspirational, and I always think, you know, if you really need me to inspire you, I mean, maybe it happens once in a blue moon, but if you really don't have this need to do it, and you're looking to me to inspire, or anyone else, you know, maybe reconsider it. And when you get quite tough, I mean, you know, and the students get discouraged, I said, look, just know one thing, okay? Me on my worst day is 10 times easier than my easiest day at work. You know, it's 10 times easier. What's being said to you is between in closed doors. It's not in front of 100 people. You know, only a small amount of foul language was used. That's, I don't deal with it. I just kidding. But anyway, you know, I agree with that. I think it's something you have to do, and if you don't, especially the way things are going, you know, reconsider. So you know, I appreciate that. Well, Andrew, I have to say, when I met you, it was literally, I feel like it was part of your retirement, because you came out, it was literally weeks before your last show, I think, Tonka. It was May, it was exactly a year ago, and your last show was early July or end of June?
Yeah, it was 2nd of July.
So we were talking about that, and we had some dinners, and of course Lorenzo came, and we took you to meet some of the people playing concerts, and we had a great time. We were talking about, and you were in a very sort of pondering mood, if I dare say, about, you know, what's the meaning of life and what's it all going to do, and then I saw you literally 2 or 3 days after your official retirement. You know, I literally, I think so.
That's
you know,
right.
that was just amazing. But you know, I had been to Wimbledon. He said, "Now listen, Andy, we need to get back and watch some of the tennis." You know, we went to your place, and you showed me. I mean, you know, clarinetist aside, I mean, I really wonder how many orchestral players ever, you know, have something that remotely resembles your book. And you right, and I mean, my jaw dropped from beginning to end. I mean, you know, now before we get there, the LSO presented you with a fairly special retirement gift. Why don't you start with what's hanging on your wall, framed? Let's start with that.
Can we see it from there? Where is it? Oh, just there, behind the
Yeah,
ladder.
but
There
we need
it
an
is.
explanation. It's not clear enough. And
What is bum 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 beam? The opening of Rosenkavalier in the hand of the composer Richard Strauss, signed
yeah,
by him. That was an amazing, amazing leaving present from the orchestra, and that, along with the my battery's about to run out. I better deal with that. That, along with this book, which I'm leaning on to get to the correct height.
So this book had, I mean, past colleagues, present colleagues, dare I say future colleagues, everyone wrote, I mean, hundreds of well wishes, but you know, the LSO went to so much trouble. They found crazy I mean, a lot of well-known conductors and soloists, you know, sent these tremendous messages to you in these amazing programs. I mean, that you yourself, you say, oh, I didn't remember. Didn't you do a Copland with Andre Previn or something? You like,
yeah.
Oh, and here's this collection. Did you? I mean, why don't we? Who are some of the conductors that you played concertos with? Did you do Bernstein with Bernstein?
I did the riffs with
Bernstein.
Yeah, that was amazing.
With Previn, I mean, who are some of these? You know, did Dochnani write a note in there, as I recall? Maybe?
Not Dochnani. Rostropovich featured large. Not in the retirement book because he was long gone. But
write something. Haitink, Bernard Haitink.
Yes. Oh yes. Yeah. I mean, wonderful. I had some really, really kind letters from all round, and very touched. And I was very grateful to my dear colleague Rachel Goff, the first bassoon, who masterminded the operation. And chivied people into saying things that I'm sure they'd later regret. But in the moment, they were able to write the most really touching tributes to see me off the premises. So that was it's a great book. And
is there anyone in my room in Hong Kong by any chance that hopefully contributed something?
I did actually. I even
yes, you're in here, mate. Yeah.
And did you put in any money for the Strauss?
I think I did actually.
He thinks he did.
I did. I actually, yes, I did. You can check. You can ask the other.
Okay. We'll let him stay and do all the dirty techie work. We wouldn't want to deprive him of that privilege, would we? What was I going to say? So give us. I mean, I was flabbergasted. It was just one after the other. And I remember your wife was there, and I thought I was being extremely supportive when I said, "Oh my God, that's amazing!" And then you turn the page, and I say, "Yeah, nice." And then you turn the page and say, "Wow, that's amazing." And then finally, your wife turns to me and she says, "It's all amazing. It's all wonderful." It's like, oh.
Yeah, she has been amazingly supportive. So, and you have to be. I mean, my goodness, if you think of the life of a orchestral musician. It ain't done without a lot of family support. So I'm very fortunate in that respect.
You can either show us, it was difficult, but give us 4 or 5. I don't want to say the most, but 4 or 5 examples of some people in the book or some program, you know, that will make all the youngsters ooh and on, you know.
Well, they'd like the one from John Williams.
Yeah,
and I mean, fabulous pictures of Abbey Road with the Star Wars in there.
Wow.
All sorts of things. Maybe I'll put a few of them. I tell you what I'll do is I'll put a few of the pictures at least. I'd be too embarrassed to put the letters because they're very touching.
Okay.
And over generous. But I'll put a few of the pictures on the website.
Okay.
In the next few days, if I can figure out how to do it, because I've forgotten. But I will. Yeah, I'll pay attention to the website. Put a few things up there that haven't been there before, and then share some of the generosity that went into the making of this book.
Fantastic. Well, Andrew, I mean, I think we'll wrap it up in a minute. I mean, well, this has been a great experience for me, and my first, and it's just great to see you, quasi live, and I did give you a ring a couple of weeks ago, but it's really great to see you in such good spirits, and looking healthy and everything, and just wonderful to hear all these great stories and words of wisdom collected. As you were saying, 34 years, I put it that you probably beat Stanley Drucker, who's in the Guinness Book of World Records for 60 years, because you had about a London career between the St. Martin's Academy and London Symphony is about 3 times of a ordinary orchestra job. So I mean, the experiences you've had, and I'm sure I speak for all of us in saying we're really thank you for all the contributions that you've done. I mean, I know you go all over. I mean, the United States and Australia and Hong Kong, and I've learned so much from you over those wonderful trips. I'm really grateful that we were able to bring you here. And I think, I mean, you're a legend in the orchestral world, obviously. Goes without saying, and a tremendous storyteller. So I just can't thank you enough. And this has just been such a great hour and a half highlight over my January 23 quasi lockdown till now. So thank you so much. And it needs to be said that Andrew, until this very unfortunate situation for the performing arts came up, I believe, Andrew, that you were as engaged, had as many engagements as you ever had from your retirement to the end of the year, thus far. I mean, to say that we won't be hearing your words of wisdom as a teacher or as a performer, it just wouldn't be accurate.
Well, firstly, it's been a great pleasure catching up with you, Andy. Always, our friendship goes back a very long way. And I'm amazed that some of my distinguished colleagues eavesdropping on us, shooting the breeze. And so that's very, very kind of them as well. You're absolutely right. It's quite difficult to stop. Now we have this enforced pause, but yeah, I'm not planning on stopping what I do for a while. But great to enjoy your friendship and to share our conversation, and good luck. I shall be tuning into the next one. I shall be finding out, and if people have any questions that they need to ask, then there must be some technology that shoots them in my direction, whether it's Facebook or through the website. So thanks to you, Andy, for setting this up. Thanks to Lorenzo in the background.
Thank you.
Wave to the audience.
Great to see you. Yeah, love to meet you. And
Okay.
Andy, sign off, and I'll say goodbye now. Thanks.
Right. And all the best to Douglas and everyone else. So
thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed as much as we did. All the best, everyone. Wash your hands.